Welcome to the Linea Light Podcast Section. This podcast episode, featuring Peter Hugh, president of Hugh Lighting Design, is sponsored by Interlux. Please visit our website at inter-lux.com to learn about our tools for lighting. The topic of this podcast episode is the challenges of lighting older and historic buildings. Thank you for joining us, Peter. What types of obstacles do older buildings present with regard to lighting?
Older buildings face challenges way beyond just outdated wiring. You have architectural restrictions such as historic ceilings. You often have stuff that people have no idea about until they start demolishing or getting into the actual renovation work. We've seen old newspapers, we've seen structural concrete, brick, stone, stuff that appeared on no plans whatsoever. So it really involves a whole sense of improvisation in some cases of what you need to be able to do. Other things that older buildings kind of present are the character, whether it be the historic character, whether they be colonial, whether they be somewhat more traditional, more European. You've got to try and find a way that works within that character. Certainly you want to have a design style and you want to implement something. That's kind of why we're hired. But you also have to respect the history of what it is and the architecture of what it was meant to be. Other challenges certainly can involve how do you implement some of the new technology, especially controls and wiring the fixtures. So I'm not talking about paper wiring and the actual hard wires themselves, but in many cases now, especially with LED, if you are using say 0 to 10 or other protocols, you now have to pull additional wiring. And whether you have access to be able to run new conduit or if you have to fish through existing conduit determines whether you can only pull 2 wires or can you get 4 or 5 wires through. Thus, a lot of people are looking at wireless. Issue with wireless is a lot of older buildings, because of their construction, the wireless signals are not necessarily all that clear and don't go through that well. So you have to allow for a lot of repeaters or transmitters throughout.
Is it difficult to incorporate modern light fixtures into historic buildings?
The difficulty in finding modern light fixtures or modern styles that complement the historic interiors, it's really one of taste. In some cases, it's how much or how far your client is willing to go. This is something I kind of find that outside of the US are a little more open to than we are here. Here in the US, they tend to be a little bit more direct interpretive, if you will. If it is an old colonial, by God, we have got to find an old colonial fixture. It'd be hard to find a way to put something that's a lot more contemporary with more, say, feminine, sleek lines versus something that is heavy and masculine. So therein lies a lot of the difficulty. In a lot of cases, the client has hired us to freshen it up or to make it appeal to a younger generation, for instance. In this case, we have to kind of find fixtures that fall in that category of transitional. They're not completely Jetsons futuristic, but we certainly don't want to have just the standard bowl or balls either. So therein lies some of the difficulty, but honestly, in some cases, some of the fun as well. The other part that is sort of unspoken, but not unspoken, is of course budget. When you're talking about finding fixturing within historic interiors, especially when you're talking about more modern type lights, you're looking at certain budgets and how much has the client or the owner budgeted for. In many cases, in their minds, it's the older incandescent. They haven't thought about what LED cost really means, and perhaps LED controls. So therein becomes actually a little bit more of a challenge than just the aesthetic look. Last thing is scale. We're currently doing several jobs right now where trying to find something that's a little more transitional, as I said, but within larger scale that works within historic type buildings is a little more difficult. A lot of the more zoomy things, if you will, tend to be on a little bit of a smaller or perhaps medium scale, but not in the 3 and 4 foot tall and giving me 10 plus inches of girth that are involved. So that really fills some space without going to extreme costs. So that becomes the other challenge that we kind of have to deal with.
Can you tell us about your most challenging project that involved lighting an older building?
My most challenging lighting project in an older building, I kind of have to give two. One is from me, Peter Hugh, as president of Hugh Lighting Design, my own firm, which is the project we just recently completed. It was in Chicago, the Cook County Hospital being redone and renovated into a dual brand hotel. This was a structure that is well over 75 years old and was being completely turned into a new hospitality place. So the multiple challenges here were we had a lot of historic spaces, many of which we did not know were historic until they kind of got into it more. So, for instance, where we designed the lobby with a degree of downlights, it was suddenly decreed that the ceiling was historic and we could no longer put anything recessed into it. So therefore, all diffusers, all lights, everything had to not go into the ceiling, which made for a whole new set of coordination and redesign going forward. Then when it came to the other parts of the interior, for instance, no ceiling height was the same. So we didn't have typicals. The typical guest room corridors ranged from 8'6" to 12 foot. So we had different conditions throughout, including different recess depths because the slabs were just poured differently and the stuff was above there. When it came to the exterior for this project, because of the historic nature of it, we of course had to find fixtures that could perform the way we wanted them to do, but they could not be seen. The Historic Landmarks Commission specifically said that the fixtures had to be hidden, including conduit and routing power to them had to be hidden. But in some cases, we were lighting columns that were 40 feet tall, so we needed some serious punch. So it took a lot of research to find fixtures and manufacturers that could do just that, give us a kind of punch, elegant performance, but a small profile. The other project that I'll kind of say that was quite a challenge was Peter Hugh. Before I started the firm, I was with C.M. Kling and Associates, Candy Kling, when we worked on the Washington National Cathedral. And here was a case where we had some kind of blueprints, but they weren't necessarily the most accurate because the way the cathedral was built, the stonemasons at a certain points just sort of took it on themselves. So a lot of the project involved scrambling around and climbing and finding where fixtures might go and shining them with extension cords and seeing what we liked. And then quite literally chalk marking where the fixtures had to go because we couldn't mark them on a plan. What we did end up doing was taking a lot of photos and then marking on the photos and cross-referencing it to another book to what that fixture cut was, so that we could walk the contractors through how that was done. We also had the caveat that the cathedral wanted the stone to be lit to, and I quote, that of an autumn sunset. So we had to actually chart what an autumn sunset on that stone looked like and find how to achieve that, which we did via about 40% dimming on halogen source. So that's kind of the reason why we went with what we did. In the end, it was a lot of fun, actually. I enjoyed climbing around and exploring and finding things. A little frustrating at times, but in all cases, and with the cathedral and with the Cook County, fortunately, they turned out quite well, and it can be done.
On behalf of Interlux and Linea Light Group, thank you very much, Peter. We learned a great deal about the challenges of lighting older and historic buildings.
Thank you for joining us. Discover more on our website, linealight.com.